And then if people want to just introduce themselves, say where they're from in the chat as they trickle in. Okay, so today I'm really excited because we're interviewing Vanessa Pham. She's the co-founder of Omsom, which is an e-commerce brand that sells Asian cooking kits for American pantries. Omsom is just the most incredible brand. I've been very much like crushing on this brand for a long time, and Christina has been the same. I really would encourage you to all go and take a look at the company and the amazing work that they do. So yeah, today we're inviting Vanessa onto the stage to talk about her story as an entrepreneur. She co-founded the company with her sister. She is a former Harvard graduate. She also was recently featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. She's a former consultant of Bain Company as well. So just lots of incredible accolades, and really excited to hear your thoughts on entrepreneurship. So yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and excited to, share anything that's helpful, and feel free y'all to jump in with questions or anything like that. Like, very open to sharing anything that might be helpful for y'all. So I think, the introduction from Rashina was really thorough. I mean, just for a little bit of background on Omsom. We're a very young brand. We're less than a year old. We launched in May of 2020, and our whole mission is to reclaim Asian flavors that have been diluted in the American mainstream grocery stores for so long. We've always seen, the products to be very stereotypical in design, very diluted in flavor. And so my sister and I decided, it's time to build a brand with cultural integrity in this space, and we think we can be the ones to do that. So we make products that help you make Asian food in your house in 20-30 minutes with pretty much anything that you have in your pantry or your fridge, really flexible. And we work with iconic Asian chefs to bring these products to life. So I'm the daughter of Vietnamese refugees. I can't purport to be the expert on Filipino food, on Thai food, on Japanese food, right? So we work with amazing chefs based in the US who have built their names in these respective career cuisines, and who are actually either from these countries or their parents are from these countries, to really help us do right by the communities that we represent, which is super important to Omsom. And then a little bit about, I guess, our journey since we've launched. So we launched in May of 2020 in the middle of a pandemic, which was just wild. But it's been, the kind of response has been far beyond anything we could have imagined. So we've sold out 6 times. And the first time was in the first 72 hours. We have had like kind of full features from most kind of national news outlets here in the US. So Fast Company, Vogue, Forbes, Thrillist, like Food and Wine, which has been so amazing to see. And at this point, we've sold over 325,000 starters. And I think what's been really exciting about that is about 85% of those sales have been completely organic. So really made through word of mouth and press, and kind of like a flywheel that we've created, which has been a very efficient and lean way to grow. So yeah, that's a little bit about Omsom. At Omsom, I do a lot of different things. We're a small team where we just made our 5th full-time hire, so we're still very small. But I do everything from like product and R&D to like operations and manufacturing, logistics, to like finance, fundraising. And then my sister is kind of the more creative mind who does like content, community, brand marketing, which I can also speak to a lot of her work as well. But yeah, that's a little bit about us. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, Omsom is an incredible brand. And I think that what's really interesting about the way that you have really presented yourselves on the market is that boldness of flavor and culture and heritage is very much represented at every step of the process, from the name Omsom, which means like bold and rambunctious, to actually the way that your branding is presented and the brand tonality, the colors. I think that everyone who sees the brand just falls very much in love with it. So I think it would be interesting to hear more about, for example, the fact that you were both the daughters of Vietnamese refugees in the US, bringing your culture to the US market versus, I know a lot of the e-commerce businesses that are part of this conversation and part of Ecom Connect, they're more in the situation where they're in a specific country sharing their culture with the outside world. So I think it'd be really interesting to hear how you went about that. What was the decision-making process behind bringing that, that strength of flavor and culture across the branding? And, was that something that you had to have discussions behind the scenes about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, everything that we put out in the world, we really try to live and breathe our ethos as a company. And our ethos that we really try to live and breathe is born out of our experience as Vietnamese Americans, as Asian Americans in the US. So I'm not sure, how this translates across to different countries, but in the US, there's a lot of stereotypes around Asian Americans being, very submissive, very kind of like quiet, not strong leaders, kind of docile. And my sister and I were always genuinely hated that stereotype. We were like, we have lots of things we want to share. We have a lot of opinions. And that doesn't resonate with us. In fact, like we want to actively rail against that myth. And there's a lot of research around it, kind of this like model minority myth around Asian Americans. So that was like the seed that then led us to kind of build out this brand that is best encapsulated by our name, which is based on a Vietnamese word, Omsom. So we're called Omsom. And in Vietnamese, that literally means noisy, loud, rowdy, rambunctious. And so that's the energy and the spirit that we wanted to bring to everything. So whether that's our visual identity, you see the bright colors, you go on our website, you see like parts that are moving on our website or getting distorted. Whether that's our flavors, you taste them and they're really punchy and concentrated and flavorful. Or you're reading an article about us and we're talking about, really difficult topics like racism in America, white supremacy. Like we just don't hold back on anything. And we try to live and breathe our mission and our ethos and our energy in all the ways that we show up. So yeah, that's been both. It's kind of taken on a life of its own. I think it means a lot of things to different people. And for us, it kind of was born out of our experiences as Vietnamese Americans.
Yeah, and just for context for anyone who's listening, so if you look through the Omsom website and the blog and just all of the things that they have out there online, some of these topics are just really interesting. Like, why is the Asian food aisle, why is it called an ethnic food aisle? Why is it segregated to one part of the supermarket when there are so many different cultures in America? And even what I really liked was how you were celebrating the Lunar New Year and actually created a separate merchandise associated with that. I think it's really interesting how you've really nurtured and created like a mini universe for this brand. And I'm sure that that's why it actually sold out so many different times, because it's not just about, I think you represent something so much more than just selling a product. It's about bringing a new sense of culture and identity to so many people, I think, that are craving more. And one of the things that we have explored recently with Ecom Connect and a lot of the businesses as part of this platform is very much this idea of representing something greater within the world and not just creating a product and then selling it. It's much more about, what do you stand for, what is your vision for the world that you live in, and how are you exploring that through the creation of something that matters and brings a piece of that joy to the people who are kind of making that transaction, the other end of that transaction with you. So I think it's really interesting how you partnered with different chefs from, really amazing restaurants and brought other people into the process. I wonder if you have any stories to share from, when you decided to start this business with your sister, that process, what that looked like, whether there were any like key milestones where you were like a little bit shaky and unsure of what you were doing. I think that, people would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to share. And I'll just like quickly cover off on what you just kind of talked about first, which is the idea of like building not like a product focused brand, but really a values driven one, not being a transactional brand. And I think that's been core to how we show up, and it has been a huge part of our ability to cut through the noise to date, right? Like there's just so many e-commerce brands out there. And so if you're pushing a product, you're really limiting your ability to emotionally connect with your audience and your customers. And what really drives loyalty is an alignment in like values, an alignment in personal mission, an identification with a broader mission. And I think like that's always felt really natural to us to try to build something that's bigger than a product in and of itself. And so, I would really encourage folks to take a step back and think about, what their audience is aligned with about their own stories. I think like, you know, consumers don't really want brands anymore. They want stories. And I think a really strong brand is built in day-to-day storytelling over time, not just kind of one story on your like meet us page or about us page, but really the day-to-day stories that we tell as brands. So yeah, I would say my sister does a really great job on that. If you want to check out our social on Instagram and scroll through, like you can kind of see some really great examples of how she does that day-to-day storytelling. But to answer your original question, oh my gosh, there were so many hard times. I think the beginning in particular, I'm sure there will be more in the future. It'll come in ebbs and flows, but I think like the beginning was really, really challenging. So when I quit my job to start Omsom, I was 24 years old. And I mean, as a daughter of Vietnamese refugees, I had no generational wealth. I had just, you know, what I had saved from 2 years of being in the workforce, living in New York City where the rent is crazy. But I felt like it was the time to do it. And I personally was just really itching to build a platform for myself and my sister so that we could talk about the things we wanted to talk about and shift the dialogue and contribute to the dialogue in the US in a meaningful way. That was like my deepest motivation. So yeah, at the beginning, I mean, the whole first year we bootstrapped completely, meaning we had no external funding, and we just poured everything we had, all our life savings, into the company. The challenges we faced were a ton. So like, I think a mix of personal and professional. Like on a personal level, I was dealing with a lot of money scarcity. Like, how do I dream big about this company and then behind the scenes be like pinching pennies to like pay my rent? Or when we started fundraising, how do I pitch angel investors like this lofty vision and make them feel like, you know, feel my confidence when behind the scenes I'm like, oh my God, like I'm like trying to like, I will not take an Uber, for example. Like I can only take the train, and like just doing things to try to save money. It was a really hard like switch that I had to make from like abundance to scarcity in my life. And then I would say there's a lot of no's in the fundraising process as well. We got so many no's. I think raising for a pre-launch brand is really hard. We hadn't launched yet. I think raising for like an early stage food brand is really hard. So there were a ton of challenges there. And then I think also like I had been under a really safe track for so long. Like I had the brand name of Harvard, then Bain, and I didn't realize that my like comfort with myself was so dependent on those big names that when I quit and people were like, oh, like cute, you're running like a food brand, like, oh, is it like your mom's recipes? Which there's nothing wrong with that, but they said it in a very condescending way. And I remember just feeling like very viscerally like just kind of like disrespected or looked down on, or just like, yeah, it was definitely, I really had to grapple with like, where does my confidence come from and how do I derive that from like how I see myself, not how others see me. So yeah, it's been a journey.
That's so interesting. And I love what you said also about just how different the paths are from going to Harvard, from working at Bain Company, which, you know, I was talking to Christina about this earlier. It's like such a prestigious firm to work for. And then kind of moving from that into something so bold and creative where your voice is so important and you're speaking so many different truths on such a greater level. And I think what you said about generational scarcity also ties into that, because, you know, as someone who's the child of then immigrants or refugees, you're going into a country with this hope for a bigger future for yourself. And so naturally you work really hard and you're thinking, okay, how can I climb out of this into like a better place? And then actually what's really interesting about your story is you use that to climb into an even better place, but in a counterintuitive way, right? Because I think that is the mentality when, you know, you're moving to a new country. It's very much like, how can I create something better down a traditional proven route? And you did the proven route and then you moved to something just even more spectacular, to be honest. But so interesting to see how you had to kind of grapple with some of the generational scarcity issues to get to that point. And I think that a lot of the people listening will resonate with that, because in some of these developing countries, it's not something that we're necessarily taught about as well. Like, you know, how is the way that you think about money, the kind of the scarcity mindset, how does that affect what plays into your business and how you kind of, even the branding process, for example. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs who hesitate to be more bold in their branding process because of scarcity mindset. So it's really
Totally.
interesting how that kind of scales outwards very quickly.
Yes, that's such an interesting thing to talk, like think about specifically with branding, because like I remember like there were so many moments where in the process of developing our brand strategy, our identity and all of that, where I felt like we had to exercise courage, which wasn't necessarily what I expected. I expected creativity,
Yeah.
but I didn't expect courage. And I think like courage because you have to take, or we wanted to take risk. And I remember like we had finished the brand identity that's out there now that like, you know, like so many folks have responded well to. And now like I see lots of brands kind of ripping it off, which is fine. But I remember when we had finished it, I remember feeling so deeply fearful that we were going to put it out there and people were going to think it was like stupid and like ugly or like too garish. Like I remember just going like I would flip flop. Like there would be days where I'd be like, this is it. And there would be days where I'd be like, oh my God, we need to scrap everything and start over. And like I think that's what happens when you try something new and you take a risk. And I think it can pay off wonderfully. It can also, there are times when it won't work out. And I think we just have to kind of be like kind to ourselves. But yes, I remember during that process, I did feel like there was times where we had to be really brave to try something new that wasn't, you know, the kind of like blands that you see out there in direct to consumer now, which is like very clean, very minimalist, like the Hims and Hers brands. I don't know if y'all have seen those, but like that whole type, that was like the du jour branding when we were putting our brand together, and it would just literally just stood completely kind of went against that whole, I guess, like thinking as it relates to branding. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about that process of exercising courage in the kind of brands that, you know, at the time when you launched and even today, I just see so many similar brands that aren't doing that. I think what that has led to is just, I think it just goes to show how important it is to really push your creativity and your courage as far as you feel comfortable doing, because ultimately that led to things like, you know, your collaboration with Disney, some of the, even when I think about the April Fools that you released on your Instagram, I think that that's also exercising courage, because you're showing that you're not afraid to be playful with your audience and to be creative, and that you're doing that with the knowledge that that could also be taken in a bad way, but you're still doing it for fun. And I think that that's just a really good encouragement for similar e-commerce businesses to try and figure out what their way of doing that is and how can they put more personality into the way that they do business. I wonder whether you would like to also talk about the Disney collaboration. I'm sure lots of people are curious about that.
Yes, absolutely. So that was just so wild. Like we were 6 months old when they reached out to us. And like when we got that email, we were like, wait, what? Like, is this actually happening? Like Disney's reaching out to us. And yeah, I mean, we've been just so grateful for the opportunity. But yeah, basically Disney, this year they launched their first Southeast Asian princess movie. And, you know, I think internally they had a very clear intention of like wanting to partner with a wider array of brands. So like normally they always partner with like the McDonald's, the Kellogg's, right? And they did this time for Raya and the Last Dragon, which is the movie that we partnered with them on. I actually have my little Raya notebook that they sent me here. But yeah, they partnered with those brands, but they made an effort to also partner with more like upstart brands. And so they reached out to us, and we were able to do kind of like a limited edition sampler, which is like our variety box of Southeast Asian flavors to pair with a movie. And we made kind of like custom recipes to also pair with the movie as well. So yeah, I mean, it moved so quickly. It was so cool to get to like the chance to partner with a truly like iconic American household name. And they've been really great to work with, honestly. It's been so exciting for us to have that chance and kind of yeah, also get in front of their audience. They've been really great about working with us to like push us to their audience as well. So they sent out emails about Omsom to their email list, which is like 3.6 million people. So yeah, it's been amazing. It's been really cool.
Interesting. And I wonder if you have had the time to sit down and reflect on, I mean, that was literally 6 months after you launched. Did you sit down at some point and think, wow, all of this has happened? How did all of this come about? Like, what was it that we were doing that just made all of this shift for the brand?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, actually, our 1 year is coming up in a couple of weeks, so we'll definitely do kind of a regrouping then and a reflection. But I mean, I really think it I think it comes down to a lot of, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I can't pinpoint it to one thing. I think a lot of different things have to be in the right place. Like, I think a really strong product definitely has to be there. Um, I think like, you know, a lot of different things. But I do think at the end of the day, it's really about that day-to-day storytelling that I mentioned to you. Um, I think that we've been able to really cut through the noise and resonate in a very like meaningful, emotional, and deep way with our audience. And even if it's, you know, and that was our goal all along, was to really resonate with us, like focus on resonating with a smaller evangelist community, as opposed to just looking at like top line growth and like how many people can we get in the door and eventually we'll go out the door. Like that was not our focus to start. For our first year, we always said our focus was to go deep. And if we happened to go big, that would be a byproduct, but it wouldn't be how we measure success. And when we were, you know, fundraising, definitely investors were like, whoa, like usually a brand that's small and launching is just trying to go big as fast as possible. And we were like, no, what's more interesting to us is going deep, because that's how you kind of build a brand that stands the test of time. That's how you build for long-term value creation as opposed to just short-term growth. So we've been focused on, one, building that evangelist community, and two, building like really deep brand resonance and brand equity. And then the growth kind of just came along with it. And I think that's just like a fundamentally different way to think about building a brand, because it allows you to explore, to have courage to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do if all you were looking at relentlessly was top line sales and like ROI in terms of sales, right? And of course, like in year 2, year 3, beyond, like that'll become more and more of an important metric. But I think in the early days, it's super important to do things that are not transactional, to do things that maybe don't scale as well, like to have that personal touch, because you won't be able to do that forever. And if you don't do it early on, you'll never do it. So yeah, that's kind of some of my thinking on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that, as we've already commented on, I think that this is the right time for that. People are really craving a deeper level of connection. Also, you know, we haven't really spoken about this, but the coronavirus and everything that happened, I think, tied in very kind of easily with the fact that you're resonating on a much deeper level. And I mean, also the fact that it's like a home cooking kit, but I think that it's something people are really craving at the moment. And I think that a lot of brands don't go that extra mile to mean something more and to tie in so closely with what people really care about. I read on one of the pages of your website that cooking was your mother's love language. And I really love that, because it really resonated on such a deeper level. And my parents are Indian, so I definitely, like, that's something that I experienced through them. And I think that a lot of Asian people would actually relate to that. And that just goes to show that you wanting to really resonate to a smaller focus group, but on a deeper level, I think it's true. And I think that more of us should be thinking along those lines, because it's what we need right now, like as a planet. But also I think the e-commerce space needs to be shaken up in that kind of a way, rather than focusing on, you know, there is a bit of a trend at the moment of thinking, okay, how can I like get all these abandoned carts to fill up and get sold again? And how can I retarget people? And, you know, that's something that people have made a lot of a lot of effort to move along those lines instead. And I think that this kind of deep originality is really important. So I'm wondering if you would like to share some tools that you have picked up along the way. Like, I know that you said that your sister manages a lot of the creative side of things. So maybe from your perspective, what were some things that really helped you as you started this kind of fledgling business that's grown so beautifully?
Absolutely. Happy to share anything. So in terms of tools, do you mean like tech tools or like our tech stack?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So let's see. Well, our whole store is built on Shopify. Like, love Shopify. It's just super easy to spin up. Definitely recommend that. We do all our emails through Klaviyo. So I know some people use MailChimp, but we really like Klaviyo because you can build pretty bespoke like flows, which we did not get together until literally like a week ago. And we've been in the market for a year. So take your time. But like, you know, they have examples already set up. So like you can just activate abandoned cart and you don't have to like spend time thinking about things like that. We like love Instagram as a platform. We just started on TikTok, and it's actually gone super well. we were really surprised, but we have like one video, our first video that we put on TikTok had over 275,000 views, which we were just like, oh, okay, this is happening. So that's been really cool. I'm trying to think of what else that has been. We use QuickBooks Online for our accounting. That's worked super well for us as well. We have an SMS new, like kind of like group as well, and we use Postscript for that, which is really affordable if you want to like do a texting type newsletter. That we haven't invested too much in yet, but we know some brands do it really well, so we're kind of like starting to just kind of play around with it. We've played a bit around with like Facebook ads and Instagram ads, but it's still a very small percentage of our business. But yeah, those are some of like the main tools that we use. I'm wondering if I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'm missing, but yeah, those are some of them.
And so I have another question as well, because you got a lot of press and I know that so much of the reach was organic. So like, did you have a specific thought process around that when you launched? Was that something that you actively managed, or is it just something that was like word of mouth related?
Yes. So I get asked about press all the time, and I think it, like, for the biggest question I get, like, is it worth it? And to like invest in, and by invest in, it's really like getting somebody to spend time, like reaching out, like pitching different journalists, things like that. And I think it's important to kind of step back and look at like a broader go-to-market strategy. So like, I think the key components that make press like really, really like could be a successful, or PR a really successful channel for y'all, is like thinking about, one, like, do you have a really strong story that is relevant with broader cultural dialogues or broader conversation on the national discourse? Like, that is, because that's what's going to be the most likely indicator of your ability to get press, because that's how it works, is like journalists think about what they want to write about, and do you fit into that beat?
Yeah.
Do you fit into that narrative, that story? So think about that. And then also think about, like, I think just like your positioning as a brand and your story. Like, if you feel like it's really unique, you have a much better chance of getting press. If your industry, has been around for a while, there's a lot of other brands in the space, it might be a little bit more difficult. So maybe it's not worth it, and you should invest your time in social media instead, for example. So those are some of the things I think about. But for us, we knew that, I think, like, we felt like we were kind of one of the earlier brands to be talking about the things that we're talking about. We were like, I think we felt like it was really unique. We had this like sister story of like two, Vietnamese sisters. And we were like, we feel like there's a pretty good shot that we might be able to get some success on this front. So we ended up working with kind of two women who were very experienced in PR, and kind of did like a leaner approach, not as lean as like doing it in-house, but we had just a team of three, so we couldn't really spend time on that. We were just like launching the company. So they worked very closely with us, and we made sure they really understood the brand story so that they could then pitch it well. And that's really kind of how it worked behind the scenes.
That's really interesting. And I definitely agree that this tying into what people are talking about at the moment and having, an understanding of that at a wider global level is so important. I think that that's something that everyone here can take away from, especially because in the e-commerce space, I think that people tend to think of it more as a product related type situation. So like, how can I get my product out there? But actually, I think increasingly it's much more about the stories and what you're representing and how that does tie in with the issues that are being talked about at the moment. So I think that was actually like a really amazing takeaway that probably a lot of these people listening at the moment might not have thought about. I also think that given the fact that a lot of the companies that are joining today and the companies that will be watching are in different countries, it's increasingly important to contextualize their story and where they're coming from and what they're bringing to the table. So like, thank you for sharing about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say one more thing, because I think, like, I just want to be clear that there's like so many different ways to build an e-commerce brand, and our way is very specific way that's very focused on like storytelling, and it's a very different approach. There are also a ton of successful brands that basically have a product that already has demand for it, doesn't need a ton of education, that can have a very different approach to go to market, which is basically, we're going to use ads to scale. Our ads can be either profitable on the first order, or like on average, we know that, like, our customers come back to us 2 to 3 times, so we'll be profitable on the second or third order on average. And we'll just scale our company that way. And like, maybe we'll invest a little bit in like brand press and all these other things, but really we can just grow that way. And there's like so many brands that have done that really well, like Magic Spoon in the US. They developed basically like a better for you, I think it's like a keto cereal. And everybody knows cereal. A lot of Americans love and eat cereal, and like that brand can grow in a very different way. But for us, we knew we're like, okay, nobody knows what a starter is. That's what our product is. We have to educate around that. There's a lot of people out there that are intimidated by Asian food, whatever, and so we need to make them get excited. We need to like help them understand that we're not just like a stale teriyaki sauce that's sitting in Whole Foods on the shelf. We're something different. And so because of those unique challenges, we really wanted to invest in this way. But I just like understand that it's not everybody's approach, and like want to kind of show the spectrum of what can work depending on your product and depending on your whole strategy.
That's really interesting. And yeah, I think it's really helpful that you mentioned that. I wonder if you have any additional thoughts for any of the entrepreneurs who are listening who are kind of starting out in that process, or maybe during the coronavirus, they experienced a couple of bumps along the road in their business and aren't really sure about the decision-making process around that. It seems like you and your sister have done an amazing job with those considerations, but I wonder, do you have any thoughts to share for anyone who's listening and wondering about those things for their brand and are just unsure about which turn to take?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of so we did a lot of upfront research to get super clear on this. So like when I talk about it now, people are like, oh wow, it makes so much sense. But at the time,
Yeah.
like we could have gone so many different directions, and our research is really what informed it. So we surveyed about 200 people, and we did this super scrappily. Like we just like begged, we posted in random Facebook groups, like we begged our friends to share it to like their ERGs at work or like their communities. But we got 200 surveys. We spoke to 100 people on the phone. Like we literally had like a Calendly set up, and we had people sign up for slots, and we talked to them for like 15 minutes each. And then we actually even watched 50 people cook in their kitchens by giving them free food to watch them cook. So I mean, we spent like a couple $100 on this, but it was so worth it because we learned so much. And for us, like the deep understanding that we tried to glean from that is, what is the current state of like Asian cuisine in the US right now? What are the things that matter most to consumers when they're picking the brands that they buy? What are the biggest challenges that they face in eating and cooking Asian food? And lastly, the byproduct of all of that research, that the very like kind of the lowest level was like, who's our audience going to be? Like, who are we actually even talking to? And we learned so much in that process. Like I could talk a lot about it, but I'll spare you all the details. But like, that's really what informed then all of our go-to-market decisions. The TLDR being, actually Asian Americans are the ones that need our product the most. They're the ones that grew up on these flavors, know and love them, but don't know how to cook them at home, which I think a lot of people thought like a pantry shortcut product would be for non-Asian people who don't know how to cook Asian food, right? Like everybody thought that, but I think when we did the research, we're like, no, like the people who actually need this are Asian Americans. So I think in the research, you'll find insights like that. And then the other thing was that we saw a lot of people lacked confidence. Asian folks, non-Asian folks alike were really nervous about, oh my God, I'm going to mess this up. Like every time I try this, it never tastes like it does at the restaurants. And that informed our product, which we designed to kind of like have your back on cooking. And that also informed our really intentional approach to, I think, storytelling, because we knew we weren't going to get people hooked in just on a product alone because people were already intimidated. So we're like, we're going to have to make them just like love us, then try us, and then realize they love the product too. So yeah, I highly recommend doing some form of research. It can be super scrappy to get some insights.
So I have another question, yet another question for you, but it's just something that's been playing on my mind as well. So I saw on your website, you were talking about, like waging the war against Asian being equated with cheapness. And I think this is such an important point. And I remember when I read that, I thought, wow, finally someone is actually talking about this and voicing something that we've all been thinking about, but never really put our finger on. And so I wonder, how that came about, and also whether this was also linked to you thinking about your pricing and, maybe thinking, okay, we need to educate people on why it's important to invest a little bit more and re-educate their thinking almost about Asian cuisine. So yeah, I wonder what the backstory was to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of where to like the initial seed was, but I would say, I mean, in general, there's so much kind of like passive discussion around Asian food that assumes that it should be cheap, right? Like a lot of discussion, like when people talk about Asian food, they almost use takeout as a synonym. Um, when you go on Yelp and look at reviews or TripAdvisor, you see like for like much higher likelihood of this being on an Asian restaurant, of the review being like, this was so overpriced, like, in back at home, I can get this for $10, or my mom can make this for X amount. Talking to our chef partners, we heard this all the time, that they like really struggled with like being able to command a higher price point just because folks expected Asian food to be cheap, or that it wasn't authentic if it wasn't cheap. And so, yeah, I mean, this is just something that I think has personally frustrated us for so long. When it came to pricing our own products, we kind of just like put that to the side. We were like, we're going to price like what we think the value of the product is. Like so much work has gone into sourcing this, so much talent from our chef partners has gone into creating these products. Our ingredients are really like carefully sourced to get the kind of truest flavors. Like we go to great lengths to source, and we just felt at the end of the day we're like, okay, let's like source it on the value prop, or let's price it based on the value prop. But yeah, it's definitely challenging, and I'm just so grateful we get to continue that dialogue around pricing Asian food, and why, like, I guess like non-Asian chefs, are really basically just like European and white chefs, get to make the portion smaller and charge more for it. But like Asian chefs don't really get to do stuff like that, or black chefs or Mexican chefs, for example. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And, the thing that also I think ties in quite well with a lot of the companies that are part of Ecom Connect, and also just the wider ITC initiatives, is that many of them are putting so much time and attention into creating these beautiful products. Many of them are sustainably sourced, handmade, hand woven. Like a lot of the products that are being created are just incredible. But I see so much of the time entrepreneurs struggling to command a higher price for that product. And so that's something that, beyond the Asian cuisine market, I think is such a pressing issue for e-commerce companies across developing countries. So like, I'm really glad that you talked about that, and also that you're leading the example to show that it is possible to actually increase the price to match the value that's being offered, and talk about it and voice, like, why is this seen as a thing that Asian food is all of a sudden well priced? Like, why is that even a thing? So yeah, I just think it's so amazing that you took it upon yourselves to really talk about that, and I for one found it extremely refreshing. So I know we have a couple of questions, but I just want to ask, before we go into the Q&A, if you have any final thoughts on just building your brand during a pandemic, some of the considerations of also like the huge, very quick growth that you experienced and how you grappled with that, and just, any words of reassurance for anyone who's starting out at the moment with that e-commerce business.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I would say, I think the biggest thing that I've learned throughout all of this is like, exercise a lot of compassion for yourself and anybody that you work with in relation to your business, because that's kind of the only way that you're going to be able to ride those waves. There's so many highs and lows. I think that um, we have to basically give ourselves permission to experiment, to take calculated risks, and to fail, and then to get back up, because that's the only way we're going to learn. And this whole journey of being, an entrepreneur, building an e-commerce brand is all about experimentation, is all about learning and doing better next time because you learned something. So that's been like one of the biggest takeaways for me. I've like kind of even spent time codifying like a whole manifesto as it relates to my own leadership of building this company. And that's been one of the biggest things, is like, how do I encourage people? How do I become a coach to other people? How do I become compassionate and kind to myself? Even if we make mistakes, or, we move quickly and things don't go according to plan. So yeah, I would say find people that you can learn from, that can be a good mentor and coach to you. Find people that will support you when things get hard, and surround yourself with those good people and that energy. Like my sister has been a really incredible partner for me. And I'm so lucky to have her. I also have like mentors and advisors that I go to. So I would say like building out that kind of ecosystem for yourself is super important too.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that that's such an important point. And I also think that that's something that is completely underrated when it comes to building e-commerce brands or any brand in general is actually the people that are supporting you along that process. I think it's so important. And I think that the creativity and the flexibility and thinking that's brought to the game when you have the right people on your side is just so, so important and can really help the brand reach further across like countries and continents. And so I think you've done an amazing job of that, and I'm glad that you're here to voice these things so that other people can also think about it and see like who could they partner with and who could they kind of bring on board to really expand their horizons on that front as well. Okay, I've done a lot of talking, so I'm going to open it up for questions. I know lots of people are already asking questions, so if anyone has a question that they would like to ask Vanessa, please either put your question in the chat or unmute yourself directly and ask it to her.
Yeah, I'm going to read out loud a few questions. We have one which was already answered. So Chris was asking how you build your courage, and you already went through that. I don't know if you want to add something else.
Yeah,
especially because you left your job to start this without, it's very risky. You didn't know if it was gonna be a success or not. So
yeah, I mean, I think this all goes down to like probably two main things. One is like who you surround yourself with, which I kind of just talked about. Like I found it just so important to have support system. So whether that's an advisor, some advisors who will tell it to you straight, and some advisors who are just cheerleaders. Like no shame in having advisors that are just cheerleaders who believe in you. Like I definitely need that. And then I also invested early on in getting like a life coach. So I really encourage folks to either have, some kind of support, whether that's a life coach, an executive coach, a therapist. I've like basically ever since I quit my job, I was like, I need to have, and I started with a life coach and now I have an executive coach, and it's really, really worth the investment. And then also I do a lot of personal work in tandem with having a coach. So I journal a lot. I just have a lot of emotions. This ride is a roller coaster. But yeah, I journal a lot. I share vulnerably in spaces like this with my co-founder, with my team. I really encourage people being vulnerable. I find that anytime you're fearful or feeling shame around something, it's once you put it to the light and share it with somebody, all of a sudden it's so much lighter and you're like, oh, that's fine. I'm fine. I'm good. Versus like when you hold things close and leave it in the dark, they fester. Yeah. So a lot of my courage is derived from sharing and being vulnerable, actually.
That's great. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we have another question from Joseph, who is asking, he wants to know more about how you build this community that from the very beginning listens to your customers and followers on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned early on, we did a lot of research, and in that research we got, one, we're part of the Asian American kind of community in the US, so that definitely helps. But I think we got super close with a lot of different members of that community. We really learned, and we feel like we deeply understand them, their values, and not to say it's a monolith. Obviously, there's so many multitudes within Asian America, but we felt like we had a really good understanding of at least like kind of that community that we felt like resonated with us. And from there, it's really about centering them in everything that you do and doing that relentlessly, which is actually really hard because as a business owner, you're not necessarily incentivized to do that. You're kind of like, well, I want to be accessible to everybody. Like I want everybody to buy my product. But I think that's a huge mistake early on, because if you target a really wide range or everybody, then you can't cut through the noise. You're basically never going to get a critical mass of people talking about you, sharing you to have relevance in a meaningful way. You're going to have these little blips of like, okay, one person bought here, one person bought here, but they're not going to talk about you to each other because they're in different worlds. So I think if you stay focused and you concentrate on a smaller community to start, then with less resources, less man or woman power, then you can really get through to that community. So yeah, I really recommend brands staying focused early on. I think another great example of this is, I don't know if y'all know the brand RX Bar, which is like a really successful granola bar company that started in the US, but when they launched, they basically only focused on CrossFit. So like a weightlifting community, which is very specific, and which would have felt niche early on, but it was their kind of deep resonance with that CrossFit community that allowed them to then later on target the wellness community, which is massive early on, with the CrossFit community behind them being like, yeah, we love RX bar, and then they can cut through the noise. So really think about your strategy longer term, like step back to like 5 years, like who do you talk to year 1, year 2, year 3, and how does that expand over time, versus being like, okay, well, I want to be huge, so I should start huge, but that doesn't work when you don't have as many resources. So that's kind of how I think about community.
Great. We have another question about why you, like if you are planning to also sell on marketplaces, because so far you have your Shopify platform, but is this also part of your strategy?
Yes, this is a great question. So actually, crazily, Amazon reached out to us. They have this like kind of this program internally where they try to accelerate brands on Amazon, and like you get basically a team to support you. And they reached out for us to be a part of that. And so we got set up on Amazon, but we ultimately decided not to actually sell anything, much to their disappointment. And they're in our inbox a lot being like, why aren't you selling? But I think that that'll be there for us when we want to. Like we can always launch on Amazon, and I've heard that works very well for food brands. But I've also heard that it's really not profitable. Like it's kind of just like a way to get scale, but you kind of just like break even on those orders because Amazon really like kind of pushes you. So we were like, okay, we don't need that yet. Like we want to focus on really deep connections with folks, and we felt like customers we would get through Amazon, they would never be introduced to the Omsom universe by going through our website. So I think that's something we'll tackle later on when we kind of want to unlock more and more growth. But right now, we kind of decided to hold off in service of kind of this whole strategy of like building a really one-to-one personal connection.
Yeah, definitely. When you sell on marketplaces, you need to select which one, because it's a very competitive space.
Yes.
And
you wanna like be able to focus. So like if we started on Amazon, our team would be diverted now between our website and Amazon, and then we do some wholesale, like some retail as well. And I think for a small team, what ends up happening is you get spread too thin, and then none of them are like thoughtfully or intentionally executed. So I'm just waiting till our team is bigger as well. So like be really intentional, don't spread yourself too thin, like do a few things really well and then expand.
We have another question from Chris. I don't know if Chris, you want to unmute yourself and ask that directly. It would be great to hear your explanation directly. Otherwise, well, we can just read it from the chat. So, yeah, here it goes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to know, how did you manage to keep your content relevant to your audience? You mentioned that you befriended a couple of Asian thought leaders.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to this, although my sister is really the mastermind behind it all. I mean, this is kind of a hard answer because I think you have to have
I'm asking in terms of seeing it as a marketing strategy, because you know, keeping in touch with Asian thought leaders, they'll be able to tell you the best way to reach the audience and all of that stuff. So yeah,
great question. So I feel like, you know, I think something this is like a very honest answer, because I wish it was like super accessible, but I think the reality of it is that like my sister just lives and breathes Asian American culture and community. And I, as my job, intentionally do everything in my power to shield her from the realities of running the business. Like I try not to have her touch numbers too much. I try not to have her, you know, get in the weeds on logistics. Like she doesn't touch that stuff, which I know is not like possible for everybody. I'm sure there's a middle ground. But I think for her to like do her best work, her best creative thinking, because she doesn't think about what is like Asian America today. She thinks about what is Asian America tomorrow and how can we push to that. So that is really like emotional labor that she does. And so I just like shield her. Like I do basically like so much of this kind of like running of the business. So Yeah, I wish I could say that, like, somebody could balance all of it, and maybe they can. There's probably a way to do it lighter touch. I think like she just wants to produce like really excellent content, and I want to like allow her, enable her to do that as the creative spirit that she is. But yeah, I think at this point she's probably an Asian thought leader in and of herself. Like we both befriend a lot of thought leaders, and we just stay really close in the Asian community. We have a ton of friends that we get inspired by. And we try to inspire others. So yeah, I would say it's just, for her, it's really just living and breathing it. She's constantly reading, she's constantly writing and reflecting. She's consuming content, watching movies, all of it. But yeah, I wish it was a little bit easier, but it's kind of a lot.
I think we had another question as well that we missed out on earlier, which was actually about Omsom. What's next for Omsom for the rest of 2021? Any big plans or collaborations?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Well, let's see. The biggest one is we're actually launching a new product in mid-May. This product I'm super excited about. So I don't know what y'all know about MSG, but MSG is a I should be better at talking about this, but MSG is a seasoning that has been villainized around the world for so long, when it really doesn't need to be. There's no research that says it's bad for you. It's really just something that makes things taste more umami. And it's actually derived from plants, although it is definitely like kind of like processed. But I basically have treated it like salt my whole life. It's just another way to season your food. And there's been so much kind of railing against MSG that when you actually peel back the layers, it really comes from a place of xenophobia, of kind of vilifying Asian cuisine and Asian restaurants, especially like Chinese-American restaurants. And that still exists today. And, Omsom being the brand that wants to speak out on issues, we have decided to take a really hard stance on MSG. And while we haven't had it in our products to date, we talk about MSG, we educate folks on it, and say, hey, it's actually safe to use. Like, don't listen to the really kind of antiquated and xenophobic views on MSG of times past. Like, the future is really clear on MSG not being bad for you. So we're super excited to launch the first product that actually proudly features MSG. There's a lot of products that proudly state that they don't use MSG. There's a lot of products that sneakily use MSG and don't talk about it, like Doritos and like Ranch, Hidden Valley Ranch in the US. Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, all use MSG. But we're proudly stating that there's MSG in a product that we're launching in May, with Chrissy Teigen's mom. Chrissy Teigen's like a celebrity in the US, and her mom is a really wonderful, she's kind of like a home chef, but she does a lot of Thai food. She's Thai as well. And we're launching a product with her that is meant to kind of dispel a lot of the myths around MSG. So super excited about that launch in May. And then hopefully we have some other stuff coming later in the year, but it's all in the works right now.
That's amazing. Okay, so we also have we have so many questions. We have another question saying, how do you project manage your business? What tools or strategies do you find useful in the age of uncertainty?
Okay, how do you project manage? Okay, project management. Oof, I wish I could say we had this down, but we're honestly just like a couple of people running around with our heads chopped off behind the scenes. But I mean, I honestly am putting this together right now. Like we've just been like running against like whatever opportunities come our way and vetting them. But I'm actually starting to put into place more of like a quarterly strategy planning process. I don't want to over engineer it, especially given my consulting background. Like I used to do this for corporations, and like they have like these 100-page decks. Like we'll never do that. But I did want to put together some kind of like more structure. So right now, what we do is we do weekly check-ins as a team where we give status updates on everything that we're working on. We do weekly sales calls where we reflect on the sales of the past week and talk about what worked and what didn't work in like performance. And then we do monthly budget meetings as well to talk about like how we're tracking. We do have a model that like basically projections for the next, I think like 2.5 years, 2-3 years, of how we think we're going to perform. And what's important about that, I think at the early stage is not really like, did we hit our goals too much? Like I'm pretty light on enforcing or like holding us to that just because it's so early and who even knows what will perform or how we'll perform. But I think what's important is to just figure out like basically how much runway do we have? Like how long will our capital last us? And what do we have to believe for our capital to last us that long? So we do have a monthly budget meeting that kind of plans against that. But yeah, besides that, I think we have a lot of flexibility here. And again, I think early on, it's important to be really thoughtful about like how much you want to manage and how much you want to leave to some kind of serendipity. I think in business, sometimes serendipity is undervalued. But I think it's really important to leave room for that, to leave room for creativity and spontaneity and things to surprise you and excite you because you don't know everything. And if you plan everything, you might actually restrict yourself. So doing enough so that you have visibility on like your financial situation, but then also kind of being open-ended and flexible.
I love this so much. This is music to my ears. And it seems that you've also, in the process of saying that, answered Chris's question because she was asking about whether to keep your business unstructured or to facilitate creativity. But I feel like you've really answered that. And yeah, so important to just be open to serendipity during the process of growing the business. I think that's just an amazing takeaway. I was also wondering, so you spoke about Chrissy Teigen's mom and also just a lot of the people within the Asian community. How was it transitioning from being in Bain Company and then deciding to launch this new business? How did you manage the whole, like, getting access to all of these new people, building your network, building your community in this new sector? Like, was there anything that helped during that process, even when it came to choosing your coach for executive coaching, you know, your life coach?
Yeah, that's a great question. So early on, like especially in the food world, we had no connections and I mean, to get our chef partners for our first set of products, which was our Southeast Asian line, we were literally like sliding into their DMs, emailing them again and again, like walking by their restaurant, walking in and them being like, who are you? Like, please leave. Like we had to like actually just hustle that so hard and like pitch them. We would get like 5 minutes of their time between like them getting things set up in the restaurant and we would just pitch them on the spot. So that was just the reality of it. And I think the biggest thing is just like having a real like thoughtful mission and being genuine and authentic. Like that was the biggest thing in terms of building out a community in the industry, was just like I actually believe that just like showing up in a genuine way like was really paid off for us. So and being a little bit fearless on that, like reaching out to people. You might get ignored by 5 people, but if you get one person to respond to you early on, like that might be a really helpful person. So we had a lot of people who were generous with their time early on. We also had a lot of people who had no time for us, and I get it. It's fine, you know, just kind of, you know, having humility in that and pushing forward. But yeah, it's gotten, as we've gotten like more stuff out in the market and we launched, and now, you know, we've seen some success. It's now a lot easier to get in touch with people and to have people and help us. It's kind of come full circle where like early on, a lot of investors basically like laughed us out of their office, and now they're in my email being like, hey, can I meet with you? And I'm like, oh, look at that. So it definitely has come full circle in some situations. And then in terms of like coaches, oh my gosh, yeah, that's a really hard process. I talk to so many people to find the right coach because I think it's such an important role for you. Like if you're going to really let someone into your inner circle, you really want to understand that, or you want to know that like you feel seen by them, you feel understood by them. And there's a lot of coaches I would talk with where I'd be like, yeah, they just don't get it. Like you might have specific challenges in your life. Like I had a lot.
I think she might have frozen.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Well,
let's wait for it to see if she can reconnect.
I think we are used to these kind of issues right now. No, it's quite common. Let's wait a bit.
Vanessa is in Costa Rica at the moment, so it might be the internet connection in Costa Rica that is a little bit unstable. Let's see.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, you can't have everything in paradise. And did any of you here knew about the brand before seeing it on Ecom Connect? Because for me it was, yeah, total discovery, and yeah, for Jennifer as well, and Waku, Marianne. I hope you're finding this very insightful. Ah, yeah, Joseph knows about it. Great.
Interesting. I'm sure, well, that we have a lot of no's, but I'm sure after this amazing, insightful conversation, all of those no's are now going to go and have a look at their Instagram accounts.
Yeah,
it's
and
incredible.
It's a great example to follow, as we were mentioning about a community building, because they know how to do it. And I really encourage you to follow her on Instagram, because they know what content to share, when, and how to engage with the followers.
Also, I think what she was recently sharing about going in and pitching chefs, and it's just so incredible hearing about that. And I think that is very much the true nature of an entrepreneur, is to really be that level of fearless for the sake of what they want to put out into the world. So it was just such a privilege having Vanessa on today, to be able to talk on that level of her passion.
Yeah, exactly. And how to manage teams, how difficult this is, not only in a technical, from a technical point of view, but also like a personal, to manage a team from the beginning, to explore a new business and leave everything behind and just focus on that. It's scary, but at the same time, it's exciting. She's back. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, she's here. Hi, Vanessa. Oh, still. I think she's still having issues with the connection. Okay, I don't know if she can.
Vanessa, can you hear us? Might be that she has her video off.
Well, if not, I mean, what we could do also is we're going to upload this on Ecom Connect. And if you have any questions, you can always type them there in the community, and we'll tell Vanessa that you post a question, and then she can answer back, because I still have questions myself.
I think we all have hundreds of questions that we want to ask Vanessa and her sister. Let's see.
Yeah. And yeah, I had a question for her about logistics, because it's also a big issue for all product entrepreneurs, how she handles that in the state. She's back again. Let's see. Yeah.
I'm back. Oh my God,
Yes.
my internet. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry. normal
It's a
thing.
disaster. My internet reset.
We were just saying that we had so many more questions.
Unfortunately, I do have to hop because I had blocked till 11 for this, but I'm happy to answer like any last like 1 or 2 questions before I go.
Yeah, I have a question myself. It's referring to logistics. How did you manage that? How are you doing the delivery?
Yes, this was a big thought, like, or I guess a big question for us early on. We basically had to decide if we wanted to do it ourselves, like pack them ourselves, or like, you know, hire somebody to help us with that, or to outsource it, meaning work with like a third-party logistics provider to like fulfill our orders for us. And basically early on, we decided that we were just going to launch with the ambition of being big enough to have a 3PL. We didn't know. We were just like, all right, let's just get set up. And we decided to do that. And I'm really glad we did, because it definitely, if we didn't have it, it would have been a total disaster. So it just depends on like what you think, you know, you might do when you launch in terms of sales. But we were building a pretty big email list at this point, and we had felt like, okay, there's probably a good chance that at least within the next couple of months we'll need it. So let's just get set up now. And then it ended up being the right choice for us.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, well, I know that we had to let you go, but thank you so much for this discussion. It's been incredible, and we've had so much positive feedback already from everyone listening.
So glad.
So just thank you for taking the time, and everyone, please go and check out Omsom. It is such an amazing brand. You won't be disappointed. So yeah, if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to post them into Ecom Connect, and we'll get Vanessa to share her thoughts. Thank you
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Vanessa.
everybody.
A
This
big
was so
clap.
much fun. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.